The call came early. I was asked to meet with the boss and HR. That's never a good sign. And after nearly 2 decades with the company, I didn't need a memo to know what was coming. I walked into the office, where my boss Brian sat with Kendra from HR beside him. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. "Mark, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position. Please clear out your desk by the end of the day." I gave him a polite nod, said I understood, and left the room without a word of protest. What they didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this moment for quite some time. It was a dull Tuesday, gray skies and quiet halls, the kind of day that feels off in subtle ways. As I made my way down the hallway, past the company photos, past the framed vision statements and awards I'd helped the company earn, I remembered all the late nights, the weekends sacrificed, the leadership I trained, the deals I closed. And yet, my reward was a cold goodbye. Back at my desk, people avoided eye contact. A few gave awkward pats on the back. But my focus wasn't on packing. It was on the contingency plan I had quietly set in motion a year prior. While Brian spent his career posturing, I was paying attention. I knew the ins and outs of the company, HR loopholes, contracts, systems. I had designed much of the IT infrastructure myself and understood it down to the last cable. What almost no one knew was that I owned a cybersecurity consultancy on the side. I'd kept it discreet, separate. A small firm, but growing fast, so fast, in fact, that we had already won several government contracts. Just 2 quarters earlier, this very company had unknowingly outsourced a project to my firm. By 4:50 p.m., I walked out with my things. But I didn't head home. I went straight to my other office across town, made myself a coffee, and opened my laptop. Brian thought it was over. But he had just started the second act. The next morning, Brian arrived at the office as usual, sipping his boutique espresso, dressed to impress. By 7:05 a.m., an email from legal landed in his inbox. A contract was under scrutiny. A cybersecurity vendor, approved under his leadership, was now the subject of an internal investigation. Apparently, this vendor had access to highly sensitive information, and their relationship with the company raised red flags. What Brian hadn't realized was that the vendor was my firm. I had documentation for every interaction, every signed contract, every call. Brian had fast-tracked approvals, never reading the fine print, never asking questions. By 8 a.m., the CFO had called for an emergency meeting. By 9, the board had been alerted. By 9:30, I received an email requesting a formal statement from me, sent to an internal address they'd forgotten was still active. I read the message with a smirk. They wanted clarity about the timeline and the approvals. The timeline was bulletproof. Every document was above board. The real issue was Brian's negligence, his failure to disclose his connection, his lack of oversight. They thought firing me ended my story. They didn't realize they had just handed me control of the next chapter. By midday, Brian's confident facade had shattered. In a packed boardroom, he struggled to explain the contracts. Legal looked grim. The CFO was furious. The CTO, one of the few who respected my work, looked like he was piecing together a crime scene. "This vendor," Brian said shakily, "was something Mark ran on the side. I didn't think." "You didn't disclose," the CFO interrupted. "You pushed through $2.4 million in contracts without board review. And now we have a serious compliance issue." Brian looked pale. What he didn't yet know was that every one of those contracts included terms that protected my firm and penalized the company for premature termination. One of them alone triggered a $750,000 fee if cancelled after 3 months. We had passed that mark weeks ago. Those clauses had all been approved by legal, tucked deep in the documents. But Brian never read them. He rushed the process, trying to modernize after I left. I watched the chaos unfold from my own office, reading internal chatter sent to me by someone still on the inside. One message read, "Brian's spiraling. The CTO's furious. Mark's setup is airtight. Did they really think they could erase him?" The storm had only just begun, but the cracks in their foundation were already showing. By Wednesday night, Brian was coming apart. On the surface, he tried to appear in control, storming out of meetings, barking orders at his staff, and frantically reaching out to old contacts. But nothing he did could stop what had already been set in motion. At exactly 6:13 p.m., another email landed in my inbox. This one was different, more panicked, more urgent. The subject line read, *urgent legal threat from former employee. It was clear Brian believed I had deliberately planted clauses in the contract to sabotage the company. He wanted to sue me or at least block the payout. The legal team's response shut that down instantly. Every clause had been reviewed and approved by Brian himself. Mark, they said, had disclosed everything properly. If anything had gone unnoticed, it was entirely due to Brian's own lack of oversight. This wasn't a breach of contract. It was a failure of process. In other words, Brian had no case. I had followed every protocol. Every agreement was legitimate, fully documented, and time-stamped. The $750,000 severance clause was only the tip of the iceberg. What Brian didn't realize was that I had already formed my consulting firm well before I was let go. I had started shifting over clients and vendors I had cultivated relationships with over nearly 2 decades. I even brought on 3 engineers from the old team, the same ones Brian once arrogantly claimed could replace me. Now they were working for me, making twice the money, and assisting with the very systems Brian no longer had a handle on. That evening, his assistant called me. Her voice was uneasy. "Mark," she said. "Brian was wondering if you might be willing to help out, quietly. Perhaps step in temporarily as a consultant to fix the vendor situation." I smiled and answered in a calm, measured tone. "Tell Brian I completely understand. But I'm fully booked. I wish him luck." Then I hung up. Those words, *I completely understand*, were the same ones I'd said the day they let me go. But this time, they carried a very different meaning. Now they meant, I understand you destroyed everything. And I get to watch it fall apart. By Thursday morning, the headlines hit. News broke of a major leadership shakeup at Tech Titan, following an internal audit that revealed a web of mismanagement and conflicts of interest. The article named Brian directly. He was accused of gross negligence and breaches of fiduciary duty. The financial fallout was massive. $750,000 in termination penalties, $2.4 million in frozen vendor operations, and an estimated $5.1 million in costs to rebuild systems I once managed. The media painted him for what he was, a cutthroat opportunist who tried to climb the ladder by stepping on others, only to collapse under the weight of his own shortcuts. At 9:47 a.m., I received a short message from the CTO. It read simply, "He's out. The board voted this morning. Thank you, Mark." Brian had been removed as CEO. The official story was that he stepped down for personal reasons. The reality? He was forced out. No severance. And now facing an internal legal case for damages. By Friday, offers flooded my consulting firm's inbox, not just from my previous employer, but from 2 of their biggest rivals. They admired how cleanly I'd handled the transition. They appreciated the restraint I had shown. Because I had shown restraint. I could have gone scorched earth. I didn't. And the highlight came on Saturday morning, when I pulled up to my new office, a modern downtown loft I'd purchased with earnings from my consultancy and the severance Brian failed to block. My company's name, Mark Callahan Consulting Group, gleamed in brushed steel on the front door. I paused there, taking it all in. 17 years of loyalty discarded with a single sentence. But what I got in return was far more valuable: freedom, success, and a chance to build something entirely on my own terms. As for Brian, last I heard, he was a strategic advisor at a mid-level logistics company. His LinkedIn made no mention of his time at Tech Titan. Every year, on the anniversary of that fateful Wednesday, I send him a handwritten card. It contains just 3 words. *I understand completely. Was it revenge? Maybe. Was it justified? Absolutely. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments. And if this story resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because here, every deception gets exposed, and every betrayal has its reckoning.